Is college football saving America? That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but I do firmly believe, that college football as a cultural phenomenon is leading the country back toward normalcy. Once again this weekend, we saw absolutely packed stadiums all over the country of mostly maskless fans cheering raucously for their teams after tailgating just as raucously in many cases. In some ways, it's a tale of two cities in the United States. That's Penn State right there for their famous whiteout. They had a big game against Auburn Saturday night, absolutely packed stadium, 90,000 plus people in Happy Valley, but not far from there, folks, are Washington, D.C. and New York City, places where you have to show your papers to get a hamburger. And that's what I mean when I say, in many ways, it's a tale of two countries, a tale of two cities. Let's also listen in on the action down in Florida at the University of Florida at the Swamp in Gainesville. Here they are. The Florida Gator fans singing Tom Petty, "I Won't Back Down." Now, that's a long-time tradition there, but it seems particularly fitting for today. So to discuss this, I want to bring in former NFL player, former Arkansas Razorback star, and current candidate for Senate from the state of Arkansas, Jake Bequette. So, Jake, am I exaggerating when I say that college football might be at least part of what's leading America back to normalcy here?
Well, not at all. I think in many ways, these college and pro football fans are in the vanguard of the fight to restore some semblance of sanity back into our country regarding these COVID vaccine and mask mandates. Because I think these packed stadiums every Saturday and Sunday show just how preposterous the Biden administration's policies truly are. I mean, just consider for a moment in the subject of college football, a large portion of those 100,000 fans are students who are forced to wear masks in class all week before they go to the games maskless. A large portion of those fans are people who may have already been fired or are under threat of being fired from their jobs for not taking a vaccine against their will. And I'm sure some of those fans have children who are forcibly masked as young as 2 years old on airline flights or in preschool or in elementary school. It's totally insane. And I think you're exactly right. These full packed out stadiums are an act of defiance against this lunacy.
No, and I think that's why there's a particular exuberance, I think, in college football. There's always an exuberance, but particularly this year. And by the way, I want to ask you about the problem of the inefficacy of the virus restrictions. Let's look at the state of Washington, for example. The state of Washington is one of the most vaccinated. It's in the top 10 most vaccinated states in America. 96% of the elderly population there is vaccinated. They've had some of the most onerous mask mandates there throughout the entire crisis. And yet, look at hospitalizations. This is a chart of hospitalizations, which are absolutely spiking in Washington State. Unfortunately, let's also look at deaths. Unfortunately, deaths are also spiking in the state of Washington. Now, by no means am I trying to celebrate this. This is terrible news for the state of Washington. My point here is that even the harshest of lockdown states have been unable to contain the virus. So my question to you, Jake, is don't we have to learn, particularly those of us who are not vulnerable to the virus statistically, don't we have to learn to live with the reality of the virus?
You're exactly right. The only way through this is, just as you said, it's to get through it. We have to protect those among us who are vulnerable, the sick and the elderly, those with comorbidities. But for the rest of Americans, we have to get back to living our lives. We have to show some humility. We have to understand that we're not going to be able to stop an airborne flu-like virus through government policy, through iron-fisted lockdowns. That's just not the way this works. And I think the American people are starting to wake up to this. And I think, as you pointed out earlier, these sporting events are starting to show that maybe, just maybe, the tide is beginning to turn.
Right. Now, last question for you, Jake. I want to ask you about a lot of young athletes. You were a stellar athlete. You were a star, all-SEC at the University of Arkansas. You have a Super Bowl ring from the New England Patriots. You also decided to join the U.S. military after that. We'll have you on another time to talk about that topic. But a lot of athletes who are where you were when you were a teenager, high school varsity athletes right now, places like Northern Virginia, they cannot compete if they refuse to get the shot. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's ridiculous. I think that no one should be forced or coerced or threatened to take this injection against their will, especially if you're a young and healthy athlete, especially in high school or even elementary school or college. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, not one person in college or major sports, in college or pro football, has been hospitalized or died due to the effects of COVID-19. And that's especially so for younger people. This is not a virus, thank God, that affects the young and healthy, those without comorbidities. I think that it's ridiculous that these high schools and elementary schools are forcing young children who are not in the most vulnerable demographic to take these injections. It's wrong.
Amen. Well, you're bringing a lot of common sense to this and to the Senate race. You certainly would to the United States Senate if you get there, and I think you just might. So, Jake Bequette, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.